Melbourne's underworld has long been dominated by stories of intergenerational crime, blood feuds, and shifting alliances. Among the city's most notorious criminal families is the Chaouks clan. From their origins in Lebanon to their entrenchment in Melbourne's western suburbs, the Chaouk family story is one of ambition, rivalry, and relentless criminal enterprise. Central to their notoriety is their decades-long feud with the Hadara family, a conflict that escalated from petty disputes to murder, revenge, and widespread fear across Melbourne. This video explores the history of the Chaouk family, their descent into crime, the major murders and clashes, and their ongoing presence in the city's criminal landscape. The patriarch of the family, Macchour Chaouk, arrived in Australia from Lebanon in 1969 with his wife, escaping a homeland marred by inter-village conflict that had already claimed the life of his father. The family settled in Brooklyn, a suburb in Melbourne's west, which would later become the focal point of the family's criminal activities. Initially, the Chaouks appeared as just another migrant family attempting to build a life in Australia, but Macchour's path would soon take a darker turn. Within a few years of his arrival, Macchour became entangled in criminal activity. By 1975, he faced his first assault charge, accused of attacking a man with a metal bar. Over the following decades, his criminal record expanded to include drug trafficking, with a 1983 conviction and a subsequent 5-year sentence in 2000 for heroin-related offences. Despite these convictions, the Chaouks maintained a relatively low public profile for many years. To the general Melbourne community, they were simply another migrant family. To law enforcement, however, they were a growing criminal network, steadily expanding their operations in the city's west. Alongside their criminal activities, the Chaouks even developed ties with Melbourne's Hells Angels, cementing their presence within the city's network of organised crime. These relationships provided both protection and influence, integrating the family further into illicit operations across Melbourne. On April 5th, 2005, the Chaouk family's name entered public consciousness in a violent and tragic way when one of Macchour's 5 sons, Mohammed, was killed during a police raid on the family's Brooklyn home. Special Operations Group officers were conducting the operation when the 31-year-old allegedly attacked an officer with a samurai sword. The police responded with lethal force and Mohammed was shot dead. Following the raid, threats were directed at Victoria Police, prompting an immediate upgrade of security at the St Kilda Road crime squads. This event marked a turning point for the Chaouks, from a family under surveillance to one publicly associated with violence and conflict with law enforcement. The Chaouk family's notoriety intensified with the eruption of a violent feud against another prominent Middle Eastern family, the Haddaras, based in Melbourne's west. Initially allied through shared cultural and business connections, the relationship between the two clans deteriorated sharply in 2009. The turning point was the murder of Mohammed Hadara. The 28-year-old, unarmed and alone outside his Altona North home, was shot 5 times, twice to the head and 3 times to the back. The killing, reportedly sparked by a dispute over a wedding car, ended any remaining cooperation between the families and brought their feud into the public eye. Authorities quickly moved to investigate, and Macchour Chaouk's 21-year-old nephew, Ahmed Hablas, was arrested after initially confessing to the killing. He maintained this confession for approximately a year, during which authorities prepared to prosecute him. However, Hablas later retracted the confession, claiming he had not pulled the trigger and identifying another individual as responsible. Despite his statement, there was insufficient evidence to pursue the person he named, and when Hablas eventually stood trial for the murder, the proceedings collapsed due to lack of credible evidence, leaving the case unresolved. It would take nearly 10 years for the full truth of Mohammed Hadara's murder to come to light. The killing immediately alarmed police, who feared it would trigger a cycle of retaliatory attacks between the two families. Their concerns proved justified, as tensions soon hardened into open hostility. Over the next 4 years, the Hadara-Chaouk feud spiraled into a cycle of street shootings and attempted assassinations. Tensions flared in November 2009 after a heated altercation at Williamstown Beach between Sam Hadara, Mohammed's cousin, and Bilal Hablas, Ahmed's brother, which led to threats and abusive phone calls between the two families. The following day, Sam Hadara was targeted in Altona when Macchour Chaouk, Macchour's son, drove a black BMW into the path of his car and fired multiple shots with a .22 semi-automatic handgun, hitting the windscreen at least twice. Sam and the two other occupants escaped unharmed. Just days later, Macchour was arrested carrying a loaded pistol and later faced charges including attempted murder, drug trafficking and theft. In 2013, Macchour Chaouk was found not guilty of attempted murder, but was found guilty on 3 counts of recklessly endangering life, and was sentenced on July 17, 2013 to 5 years in prison with a minimum of 3 before parole eligibility. The violence between the families continued in June 2010 when Sam Hadara was targeted once again. On June 6th, the 18-year-old was shot in the face while sitting in a car in Altona by his cousin Wally Hadara, who mistakenly believed he was targeting a Chaouk member. At the time, however, given the ongoing feud, the attack was attributed to the Chaouk family, and within days, multiple police raids targeted them, leading to the arrest of Macchour and his sons Walid, 36, and Omar, 18. Macchour and Walid were later released without charge pending further investigation, while Omar, the youngest of the family, faced multiple offences, including several firearm-related charges. The bitter feud between the Hadara and Chaouk families reached its darkest point in August 2010 with the brutal killing of Macchour, the 65-year-old patriarch of the Chaouk clan. On the morning of the 13th of August, a gunman emerged from a car and shot Macchour in the chest in the backyard of his heavily fortified Brooklyn home. The attack occurred around 10:45 am, while Macchour's wife, another family member, and 3 preschool-aged grandchildren were inside. The gunman fired through a hole in the back fence from Conifer Street, then quickly fled down Geelong Road. Attempts to save him were unsuccessful, and Macchour was pronounced dead at the scene, leaving his family and the local community in shock. TV news captured haunting images of his wife, Fatma, slumped over his body, which was later covered with a light blue sheet in the backyard. Within hours, Ahmad Hadara, patriarch of the rival Hadara family and father of Mohammed, was arrested in connection with the killing. This followed reports that Macchour, in his dying moments, had allegedly identified Hadara as his shooter. Police searched Hadara's home and examined his clothes for gunshot residue. However, Ahmad maintained that he had been at home all day and was released the following day without charge. One theory circulating at the time suggested that the actual killer had worn a grey wig to resemble Ahmad Hadara, potentially to mislead investigators and frame him for the crime. Despite intense scrutiny and immediate arrests, no one was ever charged for Macchour's murder, and to this day, the case remains officially unsolved. In 2016, coroner Sarah Hinchy concluded that there was no legal pathway to definitively identify the killer, and Ahmad Hadara, who had been implicated but never charged, passed away from natural causes in 2012. When Macchour was assassinated in 2010, the Chaouk family's ties to the Hells Angels were on full display. A motorbike procession of angels arrived at his funeral, where they joined the family in mourning. Members of the Notorious club embraced relatives in public, a show of solidarity that sent a clear message of support to the underworld. As Macchour was laid to rest beside his son Mohammed, the bikies' presence underscored how close the alliance between the Chaouks and the Hells Angels had become. At the time, the bond looked unshakable. However, in November 2016, the long-standing connection with the Hells Angels violently collapsed inside Barwon prison when 2 Chaouk family members were ambushed outside the medical centre during morning medication roll call. The attack was sudden and brutal, carried out in front of other inmates, none of whom stepped in. Prison officers quickly intervened, but not before the Chaouks suffered head injuries requiring treatment. The 3 men responsible for the attack were not angels themselves, but a mixture of hardened criminals, a convicted killer, a violent neo-Nazi, and a member of a ruthless drug syndicate. Prison sources suggested the attack was sparked by a bust-up with Hells Angels members, and that prior to the incident, Chaouk family members had expressed concern that tensions with the bikies could escalate into retaliation. However, the precise reasons for the breakdown in relations between the two groups remain unknown. The relationship that had once been cemented in blood and loyalty at Macchour's funeral had, 6 years later, broken down in the most public of ways, signalling to all of Melbourne's underworld that the alliance was over. By 2018, nearly a decade after Mohammed Hadara's murder, police had finally gathered enough evidence to bring the man identified by Ahmed Hablas in 2011 to trial. Advances in forensic technology, combined with new witness statements and corroborating circumstantial evidence, had strengthened the case to the point where prosecutors felt confident it could proceed, and Hablas was called to testify against the man he had originally named, Ali Chaouk, the 39-year-old son of Macchour. During the trial, prosecutors challenged the credibility of Hablas's earlier confession, showing that he had actually been in a car several streets away when Hadara was shot. Hablas later admitted that fear had compelled him to falsely confess, which cleared the way for him to testify against Ali Chaouk. Ultimately, the jury sided with the Crown's account that Ali had approached Hadara from behind and shot him in cold blood. In June 2019, days before the 10th anniversary of the murder, Justice Kevin Bell sentenced Ali to a maximum of 24 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 18. In court, Ali maintained his innocence to the end, calling the verdict a miscarriage of justice. But Justice Bell made it clear that the cycle of intergenerational violence within the Chaouk family, one stretching back decades, had once again claimed another victim. The conviction brought closure to homicide investigators who had spent 10 years trying to secure justice for Hadara. It also underlined how little time Ali had actually spent free in the community. Of the 15 years prior to his sentencing, he had spent 14 in prison. The year 2009, the same year he murdered Hadara, was the only time he was out. And even then, his freedom was defined not by restraint, but by yet another violent outburst. Just 3 months after the murder, Ali, then a Hells Angels prospect, became embroiled in a shocking attack that revealed his appetite for brutality. At Dallas Showgirls, a Hells Angels-linked strip club in Melbourne's CBD, he crossed paths with a 19-year-old German tourist who falsely claimed to be affiliated with the gang's overseas arm. Once it became clear the teenager was bluffing, Ali and several others decided to teach him a lesson. The tourist was beaten savagely, first with a baseball bat, then by Ali himself, who shoved a metal pole into the victim's mouth, shattering teeth, before kicking him in the chest and groin. The young man was eventually dumped in the suburbs, left with severe head and facial injuries. By the time Justice Bell delivered his sentence in 2019, it was clear that Ali's life had followed the trajectory mapped out for him by his violent upbringing. From witnessing his father shoot a man at just 10 years old, to becoming a drug distributor backed by the Hells Angels, to murdering a family rival and committing a sadistic assault on a teenage tourist, Ali Chaouk's life followed a relentless cycle of crime that ended in a Supreme Court dock. For the Hadara family, the guilty verdict finally provided accountability for Mohammed's death. For Ali, it marked the end of the only freedom he had ever truly known. Even after the violent feud with the Hadara family cooled down, the Chaouk name remained notorious. Decades of crime had cemented their reputation, and later generations continued to appear in Melbourne courts. Among them, Omar Chaouk, the youngest son of Macchour, emerged as a figure whose repeated clashes with the law reflected both his troubled upbringing and personal instability. Omar's legal troubles began in 2013 with a high-speed police chase through Melbourne's western suburbs, during which he allegedly reached speeds more than double the local limit. He faced multiple charges, including conduct endangering life, dangerous driving, and driving while disqualified. Over the following years, he continued to run afoul of the law, including allegations of breaching safety orders, theft of vehicles, and armed threats. In 2015, he became infamous after accidentally shooting himself in the testicles with a pen gun while reaching into his pocket for a cigarette, an injury that left him hospitalised and added to his notoriety. Courts repeatedly noted his limited intellectual capacity and experiences of trauma, balancing accountability with recognition of his complex background. In 2020, Omar again sparked headlines during a dangerous police pursuit on the Western Ring Road while allegedly under the influence, leading to his arrest after evading officers in a stolen vehicle. In 2022, the courts sentenced him to a community corrections order, with judges citing the extraordinary nature of his childhood, which included witnessing the killings of his father and older brother, as well as his intellectual disability, as mitigating factors. The most recent news regarding the Chaouk family comes from 2024. In April, 3 brothers, Mahmoud, Khaled and Youssef, were charged in connection with a large-scale fraud operation involving stolen mobile phones, mortgages and vehicles, with the total alleged value exceeding $4 million. The case also involved an associate, Robert William Hovendine, and the 4 faced nearly 100 charges collectively. All were granted bail as the investigation continued. Meanwhile, Ali Chaouk in June received an additional 3-month term for possessing a homemade weapon in Barwon prison, highlighting ongoing issues of violence and security within the correctional system. The Chaouk family's story is one of intergenerational violence, loyalty and ambition. From Macchour Chaouk's arrival in Australia to the bloody feud with the Haddaras, their history shows how family loyalty and vengeance fuel criminal legacies. Even with key members behind bars, the family's influence endures, reflecting the persistent power and peril of Melbourne's underworld. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you want more stories from the Australian underworld, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. Till next time, take care.